Hey, day 13 of Build Your Belonging. So, where do our triggers come from? Hope everyone's doing okay today. I've got some notes with me just to keep me on track because it's a really massive topic actually, and I wouldn't be able to cover everything that you need to know about this in the space of the time that I've kind of set aside for this video. So it's not necessarily a huge deep dive, but it should give you um, it's more than an overview, but not necessarily in depth, but it gives you a picture, it gives you something to work with. And then obviously you can go a lot deeper than this. But for the purpose of this video, I kind of want to give you enough information that you can take away and start to reflect on it. So first thing I want to start with is what is a trigger, because I mentioned it yesterday and I talked about getting triggered or being activated, and actually what might have been useful was to maybe give a little bit more clarity to what I mean by triggers. So a trigger is essentially like a sensory reminder of a painful memory. So something has happened to us in the past, however long ago, and we essentially create an imprint of the memory in our bodies, and then something will occur around us, and that could be like a smell, a sound, a person, a behaviour that somebody exhibits, being in large crowds, for example, could be triggering, and it essentially kind of reactivates the wound, and then may lead us to demonstrate certain behaviours. So might create a stress response in us, and that could be that sort of flight, fright. Get my words out, freeze or fawn, like we want to run away, we shut down, maybe we become reactive, we want to fight, or we fawn. And fawn is a really interesting one because that's where we fall into these kind of real people pleasing behaviours, making sure that everybody's okay because we feel triggered. And there's such a massive spectrum here, that I'm not going to be able to go in depth with every element of it, and it is really deeply personal as well. So it really does depend on what you've been through as to what your triggers are, your activation points, and also how you respond. So it is deeply personal, and you can start to reflect. So I'll give you kind of an idea. So let's say, for example, you were bitten by a dog as a child, a particular breed of dog. And as then, growing up and then into adulthood, you may carry a fear about that particular breed of dog throughout your entire life. That's a trigger. So it's activation of a painful memory, and there's a sensory. There's like an external sensory element to you see something, you hear something, you smell something, you taste something, would potentially trigger the trigger. And it's more than being uncomfortable. So it's not just like, oh God, I'm not sure I like this very much. It's way more than that. Like it's this real activation in the body. And often what we do when we feel triggered is we think we might shame ourselves for kind of acting way out of proportion to the circumstances that are in front of us. And in fact, other people might think that our response is way out of proportion. And that's because we're not responding to the event that's in front of us. We're actually responding to something that has happened to us earlier on in our lives. Okay. So here's another example from a kind of deeper emotional place. Let's say, for example, as a child growing up, your needs were not met. Let's say you were ignored by your parents and you have this deep sense of being abandoned. If people don't reply to you, let's say you send out text messages and people don't reply to you, that might reactivate that wounding. That could be really triggering for you or activating for you because you carry this sense of abandonment throughout your whole life. So this is really, can be really big stuff, which is why, I can only really give you a broad overview today. Essentially, the original event is stored as a memory inside of us, and it's imprinted in us at a very deep level, which is why we get that it's the sensory activation that brings everything up. So, if you've ever heard a song that holds of great importance to you, whether that's positive or negative, you can immediately, you hear that song come on the radio and you can immediately be back in a place, can't you? Now, sometimes that can be great, like, oh my God, it really reminds me of the time that I was dancing at someone's wedding. Or it could remind you of a really deeply awful relationship that you were in, or something that, that happened to you that is not a pleasant memory. So, the smell of a perfume, for example, or an aftershave could really remind you of somebody. And that can be a happy memory, that could be a not so happy memory. So it's really powerful stuff. If the event is negative, then that trigger, that activation can be, hugely overwhelming. And then, what we do is we develop beliefs about ourselves and the world around us based on the things that have happened to us in our lives. And we then look for evidence to prove that belief that we're holding is the truth. So, for example, let's say that you were bitten by a dog when you were 5, and you then become activated by the sight of that particular breed of dog. But the belief that you might form is that dogs are not safe. I am not safe around dogs. And so then, when we see dogs around us, we will see them as unsafe. We will notice the aggression in a particular type of dog and we will feel afraid. So we look for evidence to prove that it's true. It's a bit like when you Google something, whatever kind of perspective you're already holding in mind, you will find evidence to prove that belief that you are holding is absolutely true, because that's what we do. That's the way our brains work. They're looking for, our brains are kind of filtering all the information that's coming at us all day, every day, and looking for the information that demonstrates, oh yeah, this is what I already know. Here, this is the truth. Okay. So how does it all begin? Well, it all begins in childhood, unsurprisingly. And lots of people will say, and this is why lots of people won't embark on this kind of level of self-development and this kind of work, because they don't want to go back to childhood. But childhood holds a massive key to unlocking a lot of doors around our unhelpful beliefs. And I'll tell you why. When we are born, and in fact, even before we're born, so when we are still in utero, because fetuses can hear after a certain number of weeks, up until the age of 7, our brains are operating in 2 states. That is delta and theta. So the delta state goes from pre-birth, so when we can hear, up to about the age of 2. That's the delta state. And then from 2 up to about the age of 7, our brains are in theta state. And they're both fairly kind of what I would describe as dream-like states for the brain. So we're not conscious, we're not in the world as conscious beings up until the age of 7. Our brains are not developed enough to be able to make sense of the world, to be able to form, kind of logical arguments and beliefs about the world. So what we are doing, we're essentially, if you think about our brains at that age as sponges, they are just absorbing everything about the world and the people and our caregivers, and starting to kind of create ideas around what we are exposed to. And so, we're also really completely 100% reliant on our caregivers. So whatever we see, whatever we witness, whatever we're told, we will accept as truth. And we can't make sense, we can't rationalise and have logic at that age. So we also will internalise a lot of things. Children will blame themselves for things that are happening in the home. They will think it's their fault, or they think it's their job to try and fix it. So let's say, for example, you grew up in a chaotic home where your parents argued a lot. So the trigger could be shouting, because if you grew up in a chaotic home, it's likely that will have felt unsafe for you, because as a child what we need is unconditional love, safety, stability. And if you grew up in a chaotic home, it's possible that you didn't have those things. So if we don't grow up feeling safe, we can potentially feel quite anxious about the world around us and in ourselves, and believe that the world is an unsafe place to be. So then there are lots and lots of possible beliefs that would stem from that particular situation. But let's say shouting, raising our voice and shouting would be a potential trigger for somebody that grew up in a noisy, chaotic home where parents argued. Okay, so that would be one thing. Now, the beliefs that might stem from that scenario are: it's our fault and we have to fix everything for everyone around us, that we need to be quiet because if our parents were arguing, we didn't want to get in the way, so we need to be quiet, stay small, nothing bad will happen if we just stay out of the way. You can see how, and then what you need to start to think about is, well, what happens in adulthood if we're holding these beliefs? So it's my fault, I have to fix everything. Classic people pleasing core belief. Stay quiet and small and nothing terrible will happen. Lacking in self-confidence, lacking in self-worth. I have to be a good girl, or I have to be a good boy. Because we're taught that as kids, aren't we? Be a good girl, be a good boy. What that often means is don't make a fuss, be quiet, do as you're told. Very stifling behaviours. And it often comes from really well-meaning parents as well. So whilst we can kind of look to our parents and caregivers as being a part of the system that created these unhelpful beliefs, and there are many, many families out there who have intentionally, created unsafe situations for their kids. Many, many parents were just doing the best they could at the time. So it was very unintentional. They didn't know any better. They were doing the best they could. And we can relearn. So I just want to put that in there. I have to earn love and affection. So if you were brought up by parents who perhaps ignored your needs, ignored your feelings, you might feel unseen, unheard, and that you then had to work really hard to win love and affection from your parents. And that is a never-ending cycle. So what sorts of things might be triggering? And again, there's a whole massive spectrum here, but some things that might resonate with you are arguments. So people raising their voices, people being defensive, argumentative, being criticised could be another one. Getting things wrong, so making mistakes, feeling like we're disliked. These can all be quite activating situations that we, as a child, if we have this sense of abandonment and our needs haven't been met, we've internalized there's something wrong with me, I'm not lovable, I'm not loved, I have to earn affection, I have to get things right, I have to be a good girl, I have to be a good boy, stay quiet, stay small. Okay, you can see how this then plays out into adulthood. And the triggers will just be there all the time until they get activated when the conditions are quite, are right. So can we do anything about it? Is a really good question. Yes, we can. And there is a but. We can learn to recognise the triggers, which is what I was talking to you about over the last couple of days. And we can work on healing the wounds. So these original wounds and any subsequent wounds actually that have occurred afterwards, we can work on healing those. And essentially what we look to do is take the charge out of the wound. So we don't, we can't erase history. We can't change what happened to us in the past, but we can take some of the sting out of it. And we can create space for ourselves. We can learn to create space for ourselves to kind of work through the difficult emotions that are coming up for us, okay? We cannot completely eradicate the feeling, the memory, and to a large extent, our initial responses to a lot of things, because it is very much, it's that in the moment knee-jerk reaction, if you like, and we can't necessarily change absolutely everything. So I kind of want to try and balance that, but you can make huge progress, and what you can do is essentially slow all your responses down, so you're able to be in dialogue with those parts of yourself rather than just being in shame and upset and torment and stress and all those things, okay? Because all of these things that we hold, you know, these triggers, these feelings, these emotions, they are parts of us. They are not the whole of who you are. They do not define you, but they are parts of us. And, you know, very rarely is it your own personal fault that we have these parts, you know, because so much is based on our upbringing, and we can work on them. That's the thing. Nothing, absolutely nothing is set in stone. You know, I had lived with major anxiety for most of my life, major anxiety. And, you know, I feel totally different now, totally different. Do I still have anxiety? Yes, I do. But it's not there every day anymore. And I now know how to work through it because I have the tools. So the impact that it has on my life is diminished greatly because I know what to do with it now, because I've gone to those places that created these painful memories and these unhelpful beliefs that I've carried my whole life. And it's been a process. It's not a quick fix. It is not a quick fix. You cannot go and see someone and have a few sessions and expect to completely change your responses. You know, this is a journey and it takes time. And it is possible, you know, it's possible to make these changes. And of course, it very much depends on what's happened to you and those, you know, those specific events that have happened to you. But it is possible and improvements can be made. And you can essentially become more at ease. You become more at ease. You're more content in your skin. You know how to hold yourself through challenge. And we can be more reflective, essentially. So there's an overview of triggers. And I think, you know, what I've also gone into there is unhelpful core beliefs, which, you know, you can't separate these things and kind of portion them off into nice, neat little baskets or buckets. You know, we're a whole picture, and we need to work more holistically with our well-being to feel better, you know, body, mind and soul stuff. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there because I knew that would be a slightly longer one today, but tomorrow we're going to we're going to work through a practice to really help you identify where some of the activations or triggers might have actually originated from. So it's a journaling practice, so pen and paper when you watch it. And we'll start to kind of think about the subsequent beliefs that have stemmed from these events as well. So that's tomorrow's session. Okay. Enjoy your evening, everybody. And I look forward to being back with you tomorrow. And I'll see you soon. Bye.